Dear friends, welcome to today's session. So in today's video, we will be talking about constructors in Java. So let us get started. So before we go deeper into the details, first of all, we would like to discuss a few points related to constructors. The first point is that it is a block which is similar to a method, similar to a method and has the same name as that of the class name as that of the class name. So whatever your class name is, the name of the constructor should also be the same. The second point is that it does not have any return type. So whether it is void or int or anything, it will not have any return type. The third point is that whatever access modifiers are allowed, they are restricted to only public, private, protected and default. So we can use these many access modifiers with the constructors. And the fourth point is it is executed whenever an object is created. So we have to understand that constructors are not used to create an object, but it is used to initialize an object. So it is executed whenever an object is created. So we will see this with a piece of code. Okay, so let us discuss all these 4 points with the help of a small piece of code. So the first one is that it should have a name which is same as the class name. So class student, so I will have public void student. So this is a method which has the same name as that of the class. All right, so and I will close this. Now can we call this a constructor? No, because it does not have any return type, so we do not need to include this void here. Okay, simply public student would be sufficient. Now the third point is that we can use public, private, protected and default in the constructors as access modifiers, and here we have used public. And now how to execute this constructor? This constructor is executed whenever an object is created. So let me create an object inside the main method, public static void main, string argument is, and within this, whenever I am creating an object of type student, so student s is equal to new student. So immediately the constructor is called. Okay, so like we have seen in our previous video that we need to use a dot operator after the object, and then we can refer to that particular method and call it. So this is not needed here. Okay, we can simply immediately after this particular statement is written and compiled and executed, it will simply call the constructor which we have written. So all the 4 points are discussed here. The first point, it says that the name of the class should be equal or should be same as that of the name of the constructor. Okay, the second one is that it does not have any return type. The third one is that it can allow 4 different types of access modifiers, which includes public, private, protected and default. And the fourth point states that whenever a particular object is created, it will call the constructor, or the constructor would be executed. We do not need another exclusive reference to that particular method. So this should be very, very clear in our minds, all these 4 points. Okay, so now talking about why do we have to use constructors. Okay, so why constructors? Primarily we will first use an example, okay, and then we will understand better as to why we need to have a constructor. Okay, so now let us first declare a class. Okay, so class student, and within this I will create an instance variable of string type, which is string name, and then another one is not string, another one is, suppose I have a ID associated to my student ID. Okay, so ID associated, so okay, I have to declare the data type also. So string name and integer student ID. Okay, now there might be thousands of students, hundreds of students. Okay, so we have to understand accordingly that how it is, how we can basically make use of our program in order to fit all the 1000 students records or 100 students records. Now in a normal program without a constructor, if we are not having a constructor, so what I'll do is public static void main, and then string argument s, and then let me open the main method and then close it. So now let's see, let's say I have an employee. Okay, I have an object, not employee, let's say I have a student object created of student, S1. Okay, S1 is equal to new student, and I have created an object of it. Again, for this particular, let's first discuss this particular statement. Okay, I have created student S1 of the student class. Now what happens whenever I am creating this particular object? So immediately an object would be created with the name as S1. Okay, and within this the instance variable, okay, here it will be allotted as name and student ID. Okay, so name and student ID would be here. Now what happens is, by default, since we are not initializing this name and student ID, okay, this name and student ID is not yet initialized. So what happens is that immediately this name, since it is of type string, it will be initialized with the default value of string, which is null, and the student ID will be initialized to 0 because we have not initialized this as of now. Okay, again let me create another student. Let's say student S2 is equal to new student. Okay, so this is another student which is S2, and whenever I am creating S2, another object would be created. Okay, another object would be created, and here also name and student ID would be the instance variables of this particular object. Okay, so now again, since I have not initialized this object, it will be initialized to default value of string, which is null, and for student ID, since it is of integer type, the default value would be 0, right? Now if you look at both of these objects, both of them holds same value, okay? They are initialized to the same value, that is null and 0. However, basically the student IDs generally should not be same, also the names also should not be same for any 2 students or for any 3 students, right? So if we go on creating objects of this type, we will find that all of their names and their student IDs are set to null or 0, null and 0 for n number of students. However, this should not be the situation. It should have the facility of initializing it with different names and different student IDs. So in my previous video, we have already talked about initializing an object, and we have talked about 3 different methods, 3 different ways by which we can initialize the object, right? So if you go back and see that, you will be able to understand it better. However, we can make I will just mention it, we can make use of reference variables, and we can also make use of methods, all right, and we can also use constructors. So constructors we left out, and today we will be discussing about that, okay? So first of all, if I am creating a reference variable, okay, so let us say these instance variables are initialized, okay? So if I'm initializing these instance variables here, right? So string name is equal to pat, and integer student ID, let's say 001, okay? So now what happens is, it will be the let's see how the scenario would look like. Now when I am initializing the name and student ID as 001, this name will become pat and the student ID will be becoming 001 for student S1. Again, if I am considering for S2, it will remain as pat and 001. So again the same situation arises. So we cannot use this particular way or process in order to initialize the various objects, right? Now let us look into the second method, where let me initialize this particular let me initialize the objects from the main method. So I cannot use the previous one, so let me rub this off, okay? So when I am initializing it from the main method, we will see a different scenario. So from the main method, suppose S1 and S2. Now how do we initialize it? So let's say S1 dot name is equal to pat and S1 dot SID is equal to, let's say, 001. So under this situation, the first object will have pat and 001. Again, for the second object, if I have to initialize from the method, then S2 dot name is equal to J and S2 dot SID is equal to 002. Now when I am doing this, what happens is, the initial values of the S2 object will now be changed to J and 002. So this is a possible method, okay? So through this we can actually make the necessary changes that we want. For 100 different students, we will have 100 different names and 100 different student IDs. However, if you notice into this particular code, okay, if you notice into this particular code, what is the scenario? For one student, I am if I am initializing initializing the values within a method, then within the main method, then it is creating two additional statements. That means it requires two more lines of code in order to, so this is one line of code and this is another line of code in order to initialize these values. Likewise, if I have 1000 different objects, that means I have to add 2000 more lines into my code. So this is not a very practical approach. Okay, so if I am trying to initialize it in the instance variable, in the reference variable itself, then things does not work, the values do not change. Okay, if I'm trying to initialize the objects from the main method, okay, then additional lines are required. So both of these ways are not very convenient ways, or not very much practiced ways in terms of programming. They are not very much recommended. What could be the possible answer to this, and how can we go on changing without changing the values, or initializing, how can we go on initializing the values without actually adding new lines into, or without having more lines of code? Okay, so this we can achieve using constructors, right? So how can we do using constructors? So first of all, let me rub these lines off so that it looks little clean. Okay, so now talking about how I can make use of constructors. This went off. Okay, how can I make use of constructors? So we already have the main method here. All right, now if I want to initialize this, okay, object s1 and s2, then I have to use a constructor. In this case, I will be using a parameterized constructor. As of now, please do not worry about what are the different types of constructors or how they actually work. Okay, you can just focus on what the current explanation is all about. Okay, so here we will be making use of a parameterized constructors. Parameterized constructor. So what do you mean by this parameterized constructor? That while I am creating this particular object here, okay, I am also passing certain values associated with this particular object as parameters to the parameterized constructor, and that parameterized constructor will have a definite syntax. Okay, so let me show you first how it looks like. First I will rub this off. Okay, so first let me rub this off. Okay, right now first of all, I'll write down the main method again. Public static void main string args. Okay, so within this I have created an object, okay, of type student. s1 is equal to new student, and I'll keep this bracket little bigger so that I can include the parameters later. So now I have to declare a parameterized constructor. So what is the syntax of it? So usually it should have the same name. Okay, so student, I'll keep this access modifier as public student, and within this I will be passing two parameters, that is string name and integer student ID. okay, string name and integer student ID. And within this parameterized constructor, I will write as this dot name is equal to name, and this dot sid is equal to sid. Okay, so this is the parameterized constructor that we are talking about. It is having the same name as that of the class name, and within this particular bracket I am including the parameters which I will be passing from the main method. Okay, so from here I will pass pat comma 001. So pat comma 001, right? So now pat is basically the name of the student and 001 is the student ID, and this pat will go to this particular, whenever this object is created, it will be sent to this name parameter, and this will be sent to the student ID. Okay, and this student ID, this name will be stored here, and the student ID will be stored here, and these two are basically the instance variable which is created. Okay, are basically the instance variable which is created. So if you look into this program, the flow goes something like this, that now student S1 is the object, and this object has the values as pat and 001, which we are sending as parameters to the constructor, and it is getting stored in the name and student ID which we have originally declared in this particular instance variables, right? So this is how your one object is getting created. So S1 now will be initialized with these values, right? Again, if I am considering the next student, which is student S2 is equal to new student, and here I am writing J002. So this will now be passed on to the name. J will now be passed on to the parameter name, and 002 will be going to the student ID, which will be again stored in name and student ID of the whichever we have declared initially. Okay, now this keyword has a special significance, and we will be talking deeply about it in my upcoming videos. Okay, right now just remember this syntax, that we can make use of this keyword in order to store the name into the instance variables, the value of the name of the student into the variables which we have already discussed. Okay, so we could see that now the second object values also will be initialized differently as compared to the first object, right? So both of them has different values initialized to them, right? So with the help of constructors, we do not have to include any more additional statements into, or additional codes, lines of code into our existing code. We just have to create a block, okay, and this block will be capable of handling all the changes which are needed in case of the changing students, okay, in case of different students for this particular program. So that is why constructors are extremely useful when we are trying to adopt a good programming paradigm, and we do not want to we do not want to create more lines of code, as well as we do not want to we also want to change the different values, okay, of the variables, at different instances. Okay, so we have different types of constructors, and those constructors we will be talking in details in our next subsequent sessions. I believe this much is clear, and that is all for this session. So we will be talking about the different types of constructors, and we will also be looking into them uh, with the help of a program. Okay, thank you.